Introduction. Unveiling the lie. The shocking truth about the gods you thought you knew. Imagine walking into a museum, gazing upon the majestic marble statues of ancient Greek gods, and being transported to a world of myth and wonder. You marvel at the radiant smile of Apollo, the piercing gaze of Athena, and the powerful physique of Zeus. But what if I told you that the gods you're admiring are not what they seem? What if the very essence of Western culture's foundation has been distorted, manipulated, and whitewashed? For centuries, the Western world has been fed a narrative that ancient Greece was the cradle of Western civilization, and its mythology the cornerstone of our collective heritage. We've been taught to revere the gods of Olympus as paragons of beauty, wisdom, and power. But what if this narrative is built on a lie? What if the gods we've come to know and love are, in fact, a product of cultural appropriation, colonialism, and systemic racism? Welcome to the untold story of how Greek mythology was hijacked, distorted, and whitewashed to serve the interests of European supremacism. This is a story of how the rich cultural heritage of Africa and the Mediterranean was plundered, erased, and replaced with a Eurocentric narrative that has been perpetuated for centuries. In this book, we'll embark on a journey to uncover the truth about the gods you thought you knew. We'll delve into the historical records, ancient art, and literary works to reveal the dark-skinned, African, and Mediterranean roots of Greek mythology. We'll expose the intentional destruction of evidence, the manipulation of history, and the cultural appropriation that has led to the whitewashing of Greek gods. Get ready to challenge everything you thought you knew about Western culture, its heritage, and its gods. The truth is about to be unveiled, and it will change the way you see the world forever. The whitewashing of Greek gods, a cultural hijacking. The whitewashing of Greek gods is not just a matter of artistic interpretation or cultural evolution. It's a deliberate attempt to erase the African and Mediterranean roots of Western civilization and perpetuate a Eurocentric narrative. This cultural hijacking has far-reaching implications, influencing our understanding of history, culture, and identity. In the following chapters, we'll explore the historical context, the cultural exchange, and the intentional distortion of Greek mythology. We'll examine the evidence, the art, and the literature that has been suppressed, destroyed, or manipulated to serve the interests of European supremacism. We'll also discuss the impact of whitewashing on the representation of people of color in media, education, and popular culture. Join me on this journey to reclaim the truth, challenge the status quo, and celebrate the rich cultural heritage that has been hidden for far too long. The gods are waiting, and their true story is about to be told. Chapter 1. The African Origins of Greek Mythology. Greek mythology has long been regarded as the cornerstone of Western cultural heritage, but few are aware of its African roots. The ancient Greeks themselves acknowledged the influence of African cultures on their mythology, but this knowledge has been suppressed and distorted over time. The African connection. Ancient Greece was not an isolated civilization. It was a cultural melting pot, with extensive trade and cultural exchange with Africa and the Mediterranean. The Nile River, which runs through Egypt, was considered the lifeblood of African civilization, and its influence extended far beyond the continent. The Greek historian Herodotus wrote about the Egyptian origins of Greek mythology, stating that the Egyptians were the first to use the names of the 12 gods and goddesses that the Greeks later adopted. The Greek poet Homer also acknowledged the African influence on Greek mythology, referencing the Egyptian city of Thebes in his epic poem, The Iliad. The myth of the African wanderer. One of the most significant African influences on Greek mythology is the story of the African wanderer, Osiris. Osiris was an Egyptian god who was murdered by his brother Seth, only to be resurrected by his wife Isis. This myth has striking parallels with the Greek myth of Dionysus, who was also murdered and resurrected. The Greek historian Diodorus Siculus wrote that the Egyptians believed Osiris was the first to introduce agriculture, religion, and civilization to humanity. The Greeks adopted this myth, replacing Osiris with Dionysus, and making him the god of wine, fertility, and theater. The African roots of Greek gods. Many Greek gods and goddesses have African origins, including
Zeus, Amun-Ra,
Poseidon, Hades, Anubis, Athena, Neith,
Apollo, Ra,
Artemis, Isis, Ares, Seth, Aphrodite, Hathor. These African deities were incorporated into Greek mythology, often with their original stories and characteristics altered to fit the Greek narrative. The erasure of African influence. Despite the clear African influence on Greek mythology, this knowledge has been suppressed and distorted over time. The ancient Greeks themselves began to downplay the African origins of their myths, replacing them with Eurocentric narratives. The Roman Empire further solidified the Eurocentric perspective, and the Christian Church later demonized African cultures and deities as pagan and heathen. The Enlightenment and colonialism further erased African influence, portraying ancient Greece as a solely European civilization. Conclusion: the African origins of Greek mythology are undeniable, yet this knowledge has been suppressed and distorted over time. The next chapter will explore the dark-skinned gods of ancient Greece and how they were whitewashed to fit the Eurocentric narrative. The truth about the African roots of Western cultural heritage is about to be unveiled. Chapter 3: The Whitewashing of Greek Gods in Art and Media. The whitewashing of Greek gods has been perpetuated and reinforced through art, literature, and popular culture. This chapter will explore how the depiction of Greek gods has evolved over time, from dark-skinned to white-skinned, and the cultural implications of this transformation. The evolution of Greek god depictions. In ancient Greek art, gods and goddesses were depicted with dark skin, African features, and curly hair. However, as Greek culture was adopted and adapted by European cultures, the depiction of Greek gods began to change. By the Renaissance, Greek gods were often depicted as white-skinned, blonde-haired, and blue-eyed. This transformation was not accidental. It was a deliberate attempt to erase the African and Mediterranean roots of Greek culture and replace them with a Eurocentric narrative. The whitewashing of Greek gods was a visual representation of the cultural appropriation and colonization of Greek culture. The impact of whitewashing on popular culture. The whitewashing of Greek gods has had a profound impact on popular culture. In film, literature, and art, Greek gods are often depicted as white-skinned, reinforcing the Eurocentric narrative. This perpetuates the erasure of African and Mediterranean cultures and reinforces the notion that Western culture is superior. Examples of whitewashed Greek gods in popular culture include the 2010 film Clash of the Titans, which depicted Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades as white-skinned actors. The 2011 film Immortals, which depicted the gods as white-skinned, blonde-haired, and blue-eyed. The popular book series Percy Jackson and the Olympians, which depicts the gods as white-skinned and westernized. The consequences of whitewashing. The whitewashing of Greek gods has far-reaching consequences, including cultural erasure, the erasure of African and Mediterranean cultures and their contributions to Western culture. Eurocentrism, the reinforcement of the notion that Western culture is superior and the center of the world. Racism, the perpetuation of racist stereotypes and the marginalization of people of color. Conclusion: the whitewashing of Greek gods is a cultural hijacking that has distorted our understanding of Western cultural heritage. The depiction of Greek gods as white-skinned, blonde-haired, and blue-eyed is a visual representation of the cultural appropriation and colonization of Greek culture. The consequences of whitewashing are far-reaching, perpetuating cultural erasure, Eurocentrism, and racism. The truth about the dark-skinned gods of ancient Greece is about to be unveiled. Chapter 4: The Erasure of Black and Brown Heroes in Greek Mythology. Greek mythology is filled with stories of heroes and heroines who embarked on quests, battled monsters, and achieved greatness. However, the stories of black and brown heroes have been largely erased from the narrative. This chapter will explore the stories of these forgotten heroes and the cultural implications of their erasure. The story of Memnon. Memnon was a black hero in Greek mythology, known for his exceptional strength and bravery. He was the son of the Titaness Eos and the king of Ethiopia. Memnon led the Ethiopians in the Trojan War, fighting alongside the Trojans against the Greeks. Despite his impressive skills, Memnon was killed by Achilles, the greatest Greek warrior. The story of Andromeda. Andromeda was a black princess in Greek mythology, known for her beauty and courage. She was the daughter of the king and queen of Ethiopia and was chained to a rock as a sacrifice to a sea monster. Perseus, a Greek hero, saved her from the monster and later married her. The erasure of black and brown heroes. Despite their significance in Greek mythology, the stories of Memnon, Andromeda, and other black and brown heroes have been largely erased from the narrative. This erasure is a result of cultural appropriation and colonization, where the stories of black and brown people were suppressed and replaced with Eurocentric narratives. The impact of erasure. The erasure of black and brown heroes in Greek mythology has had a profound impact on the representation of people of color in Western culture. It has perpetuated the notion that people of color are not heroes, are not worthy of recognition, and are not part of the dominant culture. This erasure has also contributed to the marginalization and oppression of people of color. Conclusion. The stories of Memnon, Andromeda, and other black and brown heroes in Greek mythology are a testament to the rich cultural heritage of Africa and the Mediterranean. Their erasure from the narrative is a result of cultural appropriation and colonization, perpetuating the marginalization and oppression of people of color. The truth about the black and brown heroes of Greek mythology is about to be unveiled. Chapter 5. The Cultural Appropriation of Greek Mythology. Greek mythology has been a cornerstone of Western culture for centuries, but its cultural appropriation has led to the erasure of African and Mediterranean cultures. This chapter will explore the cultural appropriation of Greek mythology, its impact on Western culture, and the cultural implications of this appropriation. The cultural appropriation of Greek mythology. Greek mythology was born out of the cultural exchange between ancient Greece and Africa. The stories of Greek gods and heroes were influenced by African and Mediterranean cultures, but as Greek culture was adopted and adapted by European cultures, the cultural appropriation of Greek mythology began. The stories of Greek gods and heroes were stripped of their African and Mediterranean roots and replaced with Eurocentric narratives. The impact on Western culture. The cultural appropriation of Greek mythology has had a profound impact on Western culture. It has perpetuated the notion that Western culture is superior and the center of the world. The stories of Greek gods and heroes have been used to justify colonialism, imperialism, and racism. The cultural appropriation of Greek mythology has also led to the erasure of African and Mediterranean cultures, perpetuating the marginalization and oppression of people of color. The Eurocentric narrative. The Eurocentric narrative of Greek mythology has been perpetuated through art, literature, and popular culture. The stories of Greek gods and heroes have been depicted as white-skinned, blonde-haired, and blue-eyed, reinforcing the Eurocentric narrative. The Eurocentric narrative has also been used to justify the superiority of Western culture, perpetuating the marginalization and oppression of people of color. The cultural implications. The cultural appropriation of Greek mythology has far-reaching cultural implications. It perpetuates the erasure of African and Mediterranean cultures, perpetuating the marginalization and oppression of people of color. The cultural appropriation of Greek mythology also reinforces the Eurocentric narrative, perpetuating the notion that Western culture is superior and the center of the world. The impact on education. The cultural appropriation of Greek mythology has also had an impact on education. The stories of Greek gods and heroes are taught in schools, but their African and Mediterranean roots are often erased. This perpetuates the Eurocentric narrative and reinforces the marginalization and oppression of people of color. The impact on popular culture. The cultural appropriation of Greek mythology has also had an impact on popular culture. The stories of Greek gods and heroes have been adapted into films, television shows, and books, but their African and Mediterranean roots are often erased. This perpetuates the Eurocentric narrative and reinforces the marginalization and oppression of people of color. The impact on identity. The cultural appropriation of Greek mythology has also had an impact on identity. The stories of Greek gods and heroes have been used to justify the superiority of Western culture, perpetuating the marginalization and oppression of people of color. The cultural appropriation of Greek mythology also reinforces the Eurocentric narrative, perpetuating the notion that Western culture is superior and the center of the world. Conclusion: the cultural appropriation of Greek mythology is a complex issue that has far-reaching cultural implications. It perpetuates the erasure of African and Mediterranean cultures, perpetuating the marginalization and oppression of people of color. The cultural appropriation of Greek mythology also reinforces the Eurocentric narrative, perpetuating the notion that Western culture is superior and the center of the world. The truth about the cultural appropriation of Greek mythology is about to be unveiled. Chapter 6: The Reclamation of Greek Mythology. The cultural appropriation of Greek mythology has led to the erasure of African and Mediterranean cultures, but it's not too late to reclaim and recontextualize these stories. This chapter will explore the ways in which Greek mythology can be reclaimed and recontextualized to honor its African and Mediterranean roots. Reclaiming the stories. The first step in reclaiming Greek mythology is to acknowledge its African and Mediterranean roots. This means recognizing the cultural exchange and influence that occurred between ancient Greece and Africa. It also means acknowledging the ways in which Greek mythology was appropriated and distorted by European cultures. Recontextualizing the stories. Once the stories are reclaimed, they can be recontextualized to honor their African and Mediterranean roots. This means placing the stories in their original cultural context and acknowledging the cultural significance of the characters and events. It also means recognizing the ways in which the stories were used to justify colonialism, imperialism, and racism. Decolonizing the stories. Decolonizing Greek mythology means recognizing the ways in which it was used to justify colonialism and imperialism. It means acknowledging the cultural destruction and erasure that occurred as a result of colonialism and imperialism. It also means recognizing the ways in which Greek mythology was used to justify the superiority of Western culture. Reclaiming the gods. The gods and goddesses of Greek mythology were not just white-skinned, blonde-haired, and blue-eyed. They were African and Mediterranean deities, with dark skin, curly hair, and African features. Reclaiming the gods means recognizing their African and Mediterranean roots and acknowledging the cultural significance of their stories. Reclaiming the heroes. The heroes of Greek mythology were not just white-skinned, blonde-haired, and blue-eyed. They were African and Mediterranean heroes with dark skin, curly hair, and African features. Reclaiming the heroes means recognizing their African and Mediterranean roots and acknowledging the cultural significance of their stories. Conclusion: the reclamation of Greek mythology is a complex and ongoing process. It requires acknowledging the cultural appropriation and distortion of Greek mythology, recontextualizing the stories to honor their African and Mediterranean roots, decolonizing the stories to recognize the cultural destruction and erasure that occurred as a result of colonialism and imperialism, and reclaiming the gods and heroes to recognize their African and Mediterranean roots. The truth about the reclamation of Greek mythology is about to be unveiled.